The Rhine and the Danube get most of the attention when people start researching river cruises, especially for first timers. But there are two other rivers I think you should also consider: the Douro in Portugal and the Rhône in France. One winds through a narrow valley of steep terraced vineyards rising straight up from the riverbank. The other drifts through the south of France with some of the best food and wine in Europe. I've actually sailed both, and they're wonderful, but in completely different ways. The vibe, the pace, the landscape, nothing about these two rivers feels the same. So, whether you've already done the Rhine and the Danube and want a new experience, or you're planning your very first river cruise and want to start somewhere that feels a little less traveled, this video is for you. I'm Rachelle from Active Voyager, and by the end of this video, you'll have a clear picture of what each of these rivers is actually like and which one belongs on your travel list. Let's start with the Douro, and if I had to describe it in two words, I'd say dramatic landscapes. It runs through northern Portugal and into Spain, and most cruises sail between Porto and the Spanish border. But what you see along the way is unlike anything else on any river cruise. The thing that makes the Douro so visually striking is that the vineyards are cut into the hillsides into these horizontal tiers, almost like giant steps carved into the mountain. This is port wine country and some of the oldest wine producing land in the world. And because the valley is so narrow and so remote, there's almost no crowds. But before you even leave for a river cruise, the city of Porto deserves some extra time on its own. The architecture alone is worth it. There's these gorgeous, colorful tile facades covering entire building fronts, the ornate historic cafes, the steep streets that wind down to the waterfront. It's just the kind of city you want to wander through and spend more time in. And the food, oh my gosh. So Portugal is known for these flaky egg custard tarts, pastéis de nata, and there's sort of this game that the locals will ask how many you've had to eat over the course of your trip. I think we counted up to 20. The reason is they are fresh baked, they are so good, and they only cost about €1, which makes it really hard to pass up anytime you walk by a cafe or a bakery that's selling them. But my husband's Pete's personal food obsession was the Francesina, which literally means little French girl. But don't let the name fool you. It's actually a giant layered sandwich that Porto is known for. It's filled with steak and ham and sausage and smothered in a beer and tomato sauce. And it's very much a feast and not just a sandwich. So it's definitely one you want to split. We also made it to the Lello bookstore, which is one of the most beautiful bookstores in the world, did some shopping, went to a candlelit fado concert in a wine cave, and also visited the wine museum. We did all of that, and it still felt like we hadn't seen everything in Porto. The river cruise will likely include some time in Porto at the start or end of your itinerary, but I'd recommend building in an extra day or two just to give yourself some extra time to explore. Once you're actually on the river, one of the most spectacular moments is passing through the Carapatello Dam. It's the deepest lock in Europe, and everyone goes up on top deck to see it. It's one of those things that sounds strange to get excited about, but then when you're standing there and watching the water rise around you, it's really amazing to see. After Porto, it's small villages, wine estates called quintas, and terraced hillsides, and it's absolutely beautiful. The food and wine here doesn't get nearly enough attention outside of Portugal. There's port wine, obviously, but there's also vino verde, alvarinho, and regional cooking that's really delicious. The best times to go are spring, such as April and May, when the valley is really green, or harvest season too, when the wine estates are really buzzing with activity. To give you an example of what the shore excursions are like, one of our favorite ones that was actually included with the cruise was a hike above the village of Pinhal. We hiked through terraced vineyards, lush citrus trees, and those really tall cypress trees that Europe is known for. The hike was moderate, so not too challenging, but the views were incredible. Afterwards, we hiked down to a quinta for a port wine tasting, followed by lunch at a Michelin-starred restaurant. And yes, we wore our hiking boots to lunch. Our second favorite excursion actually included two experiences back in Porto. My husband Pete and I actually split up for the day, and he went cycling along the coast with a marine biologist as a guide. And then I went to a centuries-old port cellar and watched them fire open a bottle of vintage port. We met back on the ship for dinner, and we both thought we had the best afternoon. So it was fun to share stories and great that we could both do something that we loved. Now let's talk about the Rhône. And if the Douro is dramatic and somewhat outdoorsy, the Rhône is like Provence in slow motion. It runs through the south of France from Lyon to Avignon, and what you see along the way is exactly what you imagine when you think of the south of France. There's lavender fields, there's olive groves, there's Roman ruins, there's medieval villages perched up on hillsides, and there's also that famous golden light and sapphire sky that Van Gogh was chasing when he went there to paint. Lyon is also one of the greatest food cities in the world. You'll find their famous bouchons, the covered markets, these gorgeous pink praline brioches that taste nutty and sweet. The whole culture of food and cuisine is just present everywhere you go. So, starting or ending a cruise there is definitely worth building some time around. And you'll probably hear me say this often and for every embarkation port on every river, because I always recommend spending an extra day or two in these larger cities to give yourself a chance to see the most of it. The ports along the Rhone are beautiful. There's Viviers, which is a medieval village almost no one outside of France knows about, Arles, where Van Gogh actually lived and painted, and Avignon, where the cruise ends. And Avignon is actually one of my favorite stops in the whole itinerary. It's a medieval walled city known for the Palais des Papes, or the Palace of the Popes, that served as the residence for the popes during the 14th century. The whole city is just stunning. The food market is the kind of place you want to spend an entire morning in, maybe even the whole day. And the streets are full of great shopping, from clothes to shoes to handcrafted leather goods, and even street art. I actually picked up a few watercolors that I have here in my office while we were there, and I love looking at them and thinking about my cruise. In addition to the shopping, the food and wine culture in the Rhone runs deep, as you'd expect for France. You've got Chateauneuf de Pape as well as rosé almost everywhere you turn. Pretty much, if you love French food and wine, this river is going to feel like a dream. The best time to sail the Rhone is late spring through early fall. But if lavender is specifically on your list to see, you want to be there in summer when it peaks, which can change depending on the weather, but it's typically at the end of June or early July. So plan your dates very intentionally if the lavender bloom matters to you. Between the lavender excursions, the rosé, the shopping, the Rhone actually makes the ultimate girls' trip. But I have to say, my husband actually really loved this cruise too. Now let me share two actual excursions that we went on that I think really capture what the Rhone is like. The first was an excursion to visit a truffle farmer, and when we first arrived, he introduced us to his truffle dog and then showed us how they went hunting for truffles. And then he brought us back to his family's estate where he actually cooked lunch for our small group. It included a beef stew, slow cooked in a local wine, vegetables he actually picked from his garden, and a local cheese layered with truffles. All of this was in his home, and that's not the kind of travel experience you can easily find in your own, but it is the kind of access that a river cruise makes possible. The second was docking at Viviers at twilight for an evening tour. The whole town was just so quiet, and the lanterns cast this golden glow on all the old buildings with a sapphire sky above it, and it truly felt like we were walking through a Van Gogh painting. Our guide actually grew up in the village and told us stories the whole way through. And when we came back to the ship, they had warm mulled wine served to us on deck as we sailed off into the night. It's one of my favorite travel memories from that cruise. Okay, so you've heard about both rivers. How do you actually decide? For these two, I'd say start with what you're more drawn to visually. The Douro is dramatic with terraced vineyards, port wine country, and once you leave Porto behind, it gets quieter and more remote as you go. It's more active too. There's hiking through the vineyards, bike rides along the river. It's that kind of trip. The Rhône is art and food and medieval villages and the very best of Provence. It's more relaxed in pace, more about wandering and savoring, and honestly, it has a strong case for being the ultimate girls' trip. Couples love it too, but there's just something about the Rhone that feels like it's made for traveling with friends. Both rivers are wonderful for food and wine, so that's not really the tiebreaker, but the Douro leans more towards active and the Rhone leads more towards cultural, and that distinction might be exactly what you need to make the call. Also think about the cities versus the landscape. Douro has Porto at the start and then very little else in the way of cities, and that's genuinely the appeal of that river. The Rhone has Lyon, Avignon, Arles, real cultural destinations with depth that you could spend days in. So if you've already done the Rhine or Danube, the Douro in particular is going to feel completely different. It's quieter, it's more intimate, it's more focused on the land and the wine. The Rhone has some overlap and feel with the Rhine. It's beautiful towns, great food, wine culture, but there's a distinctly French personality to it. And if you're still not sure after all of that, maybe just plan to see both, just at a different time. Tell me in the comments which river you're thinking of cruising. I genuinely want to know which one's calling your name. And if you've already sailed one of them, tell me that too, because I'd love to hear about your experience. Next week, we're talking about how to actually choose the right river cruise line, because it seems every website makes each river cruise line sound perfect. And I want to give you an honest framework that actually helps you decide. And if you can't wait, head over to activevoyager.com to grab our free river cruise planning guide and packing list. I'll include the link in the description. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.